There are moments in a young actor's life that can completely change everything. Sometimes it happens on a movie set. Sometimes it happens during an audition. And sometimes it happens in a way that feels almost impossible to believe. For Tom Holland, one of the biggest moments of his career did not begin with a dramatic phone call, a grand announcement, or a carefully planned meeting. It happened online, but before that moment turned a young British actor into one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. There was a much longer story, a story about family, a story about discipline, a story about growing up in front of millions of people, and most importantly, a story about refusing to let success change the values that had been built into him from the beginning, long before the Spider-Man suit, before the massive Marvel spotlight, before audiences around the world knew his name. Tom Holland was simply a young performer trying to find his place. He had already spent years acting. He had already worked incredibly hard. He had already experienced the pressure that comes with being a young celebrity. But the biggest opportunity of his life was still waiting for him. And when it finally arrived, even Tom Holland himself could hardly believe it. This is the story behind that journey, the story of what happened before Spider-Man. One of the most revealing things about Tom Holland's journey is that success never seemed to erase the importance of his beginnings. During a conversation about his career, the discussion turned toward his work with young audiences and the responsibility that comes with being someone children look up to. For Tom, this was not simply another job. It was something personal. He explained that he had spent a long time creating programming for younger audiences. And while many people might naturally wonder why a successful young actor would continue working in that space, Tom saw it differently. He believed that being a young person with influence came with responsibility. That idea says a lot about the person behind the celebrity. Because fame can create distance. The more successful someone becomes, the easier it can be to forget it felt like to be the person watching from the other side of the screen. But Tom seemed to understand something important. Young viewers were watching, children were paying attention, and parents were noticing. He talked about parents approaching him and thanking him for being an inspiration to their sons and daughters. For Tom, those moments meant more than simply receiving praise. They represented a kind of responsibility, a responsibility to use his position positively. And that perspective would become one of the most important themes of his career, because Tom Holland wasn't simply becoming famous. He was becoming someone other people were beginning to look up to. And that can be a complicated position for any young person, especially when the world is watching. If there was one thing Tom made clear, it was that he did not believe he had reached this point alone. When the conversation turned toward how he had managed to avoid many of the problems associated with young child stars, his answer was surprisingly simple. He gave credit to his parents. He described himself as fortunate to have the parents he had. According to Tom, they had always instilled core values in him. Those values became something he carried with him throughout his career, and that family environment became a kind of protection, a barrier between Tom and some of the chaos that can come with growing up in the public eye. For many young performers, fame can arrive before they are emotionally prepared for it. Suddenly, strangers know their names. People have opinions about them. Their decisions can become public conversations, and mistakes that would normally disappear after a few days can remain online indefinitely. Tom's family, however, remained an important part of his foundation. He openly acknowledged that not everyone has that kind of support, and that was something he appreciated. It is easy to look at a successful actor and imagine that their career is the result of talent alone. But behind many successful young performers is a network of people who help them stay grounded. For Tom, that network began at home. There was even a funny glimpse into the everyday relationship Tom had with his mother. During the conversation, an image of his mother appeared. She was flexing her muscles. The explanation was simple. She had become extremely interested in fitness. She was apparently a regular at spinning classes and had developed a serious fitness routine. But the story became even more amusing when Tom explained how his mother's morning routine affected him. His mother would get up early. She would go to her spin class, and after finishing, she would call Tom. Her message was essentially, get up. It was not exactly the kind of alarm clock most people have. But for Tom, it worked. He joked about having a system, and that small detail gave audiences a glimpse into the ordinary side of his life. Behind the actor, who was becoming increasingly famous, was still a young man whose mother could call him in the morning and tell him to get out of bed. It was funny, it was relatable, and it also showed how close his family remained to his everyday life. By this stage in his career, Tom was already becoming an established young actor. Naturally, people might assume that someone in his position would immediately move away from home. Hollywood often creates that expectation. Young stars become independent. They move to major cities. They build new lives. They create distance from their childhood. But Tom's situation was different. He was still living at home, and while there were practical benefits to it, there was something more important happening beneath the surface. Tom explained that his relationship with his parents had boundaries. As he became older, he wanted more independence. He wanted space. He wanted the opportunity to grow, and his parents respected that. That balance was important because growing up does not necessarily mean completely cutting yourself off from the people who raised you. Sometimes independence means learning how to create boundaries while still maintaining the relationships that matter. Tom seemed to have found that balance. He could have his own space. He could experience more freedom. But he still had the support of his family around him. And of course, there were practical benefits. He jokingly pointed out that he did not even have to wake himself up. His mother could handle that. He had a free ride when he needed one, and from his perspective, why would he give that up? It was humorous, but it also reflected something deeper. Despite his growing fame, Tom was still connected to the ordinary routines of family life. Then the conversation moved toward the opportunity that would completely transform his career. Spider-Man. The announcement immediately changed the energy in the room. This was not just another acting job. This was Spider-Man. For a young actor who had grown up as a fan of the character, the opportunity represented something enormous. Tom admitted that he was a huge Spider-Man fan. That made the situation even more meaningful, because now he wasn't simply being offered a role in another movie. He was being given the chance to become a character he had admired while growing up. But there was a problem. He couldn't say much. At that point, the details surrounding his role were being kept secret. He could confirm that he was going to be in the new Spider-Man movie. But beyond that, there wasn't much he was allowed to reveal. For someone excited about the biggest opportunity of his life, keeping quiet must have been incredibly difficult. Yet that was the reality. The world was curious. Fans wanted answers, and Tom had to remain careful. But there was something else happening behind the scenes. He was about to enter a completely different level of the acting industry, and he knew that he had to prove himself. One of the most important details Tom shared was his attitude toward getting the Spider-Man role. Despite already having years of experience, he did not approach the opportunity as though he deserved it. Instead, he described himself as essentially unknown in the movie world. He had never been in a major movie in the way this opportunity represented, so he had to start again. Audition, audition again, and audition again. That process is easy to underestimate. When audiences see the final movie, they see the finished performance. They see the costume. They see the action. They see the polished character. What they don't see is the uncertainty before the role is awarded. They don't see the waiting. They don't see the meetings. They don't see the auditions. They don't see the rejection that can happen behind the scenes. And Tom understood that. He knew people already had an idea of who he was because of the things he had done before. That meant he had something to prove. He needed to break through people's preconceived ideas. He needed to demonstrate that he could become something different. And that required work, real work. He talked about taking the meetings, taking the auditions, starting from the beginning. That mindset is important because the biggest opportunity of his career did not simply arrive because he was already famous. He still had to fight for it. He still had to audition. He still had to convince people. And eventually, that persistence would pay off. What makes Tom's story even more interesting is that by the time he was stepping into this massive opportunity, he had already been acting for years. During the conversation, he revealed that he was approaching a major milestone. 10 years of acting. 10 years. End of story. But it wasn't, because becoming Spider-Man came with an entirely new level of pressure. Millions of people already loved the character. Millions of people had expectations. And now, Tom had to step into one of the most recognizable superhero roles in the world. He could not simply play Spider-Man. He had to convince audiences that he belonged there. That meant taking everything he had learned throughout his childhood and putting it into one performance. His acting experience, his physical abilities, his energy, his humor, his discipline, and the confidence that had been developed over years of work. It was a massive challenge, but perhaps the most important thing was that Tom had already learned something many people do not learn until much later in life. Success is not something you simply receive. It is something you have to keep earning. One of the most interesting parts of this chapter is how normal some of Tom's life still appeared. His mother woke him up. His family helped him. He was buying furniture. He joked about needing rides. He talked about his dog. He laughed about embarrassing rehearsal footage. And yet at the same time, his career was moving towards something enormous. That contrast made his journey unique. He was becoming one of the most exciting young actors in Hollywood, while still maintaining connections to the ordinary world. That grounding would matter, because fame can move extremely quickly. One day you are auditioning. The next day, millions of people know your name. One day you are waiting for a phone call. The next day you are wearing the Spider-Man suit. And when that happens, having people around you who remember who you were before the fame can become incredibly important. Tom had that. His family was there, and they had been there before Spider-Man. That theme becomes even more powerful when viewed alongside his Spider-Man journey. He was not simply becoming famous. He was becoming an example. Young fans would watch him. Children would see him as Spider-Man. They would look at his career. They would follow what he did. And Tom understood the importance of that. His approach was not simply, I'm famous now. It was, people are watching. That mindset can change everything, because once you understand that your behavior can influence others, fame becomes more than attention. It becomes responsibility. And perhaps that is one reason his family values mattered so much. The person underneath the fame still needed to be strong enough to handle the fame. The Spider-Man announcement may have looked like the destination, but in reality, it was the beginning of another journey. The auditions were over. The waiting was over. The uncertainty was over. Now came the work, the physical demands, the expectations, the pressure, the cameras, the costume, the action, the responsibility of carrying one of the world's most beloved characters. and Tom would have to prove that the decision to choose him was the right one. But if there was one thing his story had already demonstrated, it was that he was not afraid of hard work. He had been acting for years. He had spent months auditioning. He had waited 6 weeks for an answer. He had repeatedly put himself in situations where he could fail. He had trained. He had danced. He had fallen. He had gotten back up. And now he was ready for the biggest challenge of his life. There is something almost poetic about the way Tom discovered that he was Spider-Man. He had waited for a phone call. Instead, the internet told him. He had expected an official announcement directly to him. Instead, he found out along with the rest of the world. And yet, perhaps that was fitting, because Spider-Man was about to become a character, shared with millions of people. The secret could only stay secret for so long. The moment Marvel announced it, Tom's private dream became public. Fans reacted, the industry reacted, and Tom's life changed. But behind that headline was a young man who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The world saw the announcement, they saw the name, they saw Spider-Man, but they did not see every early morning, every audition, every rehearsal, every failed attempt, every family conversation, every moment of uncertainty. Those were the pieces that had built the person who would eventually wear the suit. Talent matters. Opportunity matters. Luck matters. But Tom's story suggests that there was another ingredient: persistence. He did not describe the Spider-Man opportunity as something that simply fell into his lap. He described the auditions, the meetings, the work, the need to break through preconceived ideas. That is a powerful lesson for anyone trying to succeed. Sometimes people see the final result and assume the journey was easy. They see the actor on screen. They do not see the actor waiting outside the audition room. They see the superhero. They do not see the young performer who had to prove himself. They see the success. They do not see the uncertainty. Tom's journey reminds us that the final moment of success is often supported by hundreds of moments nobody ever sees. By the end of this chapter, Tom Holland was standing at the edge of a completely new life. He had his first apartment. He was approaching adulthood. He had nearly a decade of acting experience. He had already proven himself as a performer. He had his family beside him, and now he had the role he had dreamed about, Spider-Man. But the biggest question remained: could he actually live up to the expectations? Could he make the character his own? Could he convince audiences around the world? Could this young British actor become the Spider-Man a new generation would grow up watching? Nobody knew the answer yet. Not completely. But one thing was certain: he was ready to try, because he had already spent years preparing for the moment when opportunity finally arrived. And when it did, he did not run from it. He ran toward it. Just like he had run downstairs when he saw the Marvel announcement. Just like he had thrown himself into auditions. Just like he had thrown himself into dance rehearsals. Just like he had continued working, even when people already had assumptions about him. The Spider-Man suit had not made Tom Holland who he was. The journey before the suit had done that, and now that journey was about to enter its most important chapter yet. The world was about to meet Tom Holland as Spider-Man, but the real story was only beginning.
The moment Tom Holland discovered that he was going to play Spider-Man, his life changed, but getting the role was only the beginning. The announcement was exciting. The fans were excited. Marvel was excited. Tom was excited. But behind all of that excitement was a much bigger question. What happens after you get the dream role? What happens when the character you are about to play is already loved by millions of people? And what happens when you are still incredibly young? Those questions would become part of Tom Holland's new reality. For years, he had worked toward becoming a serious actor. He had spent roughly a decade performing. He had auditioned. He had trained. He had learned how to deal with pressure. He had grown up with his family supporting him. But Spider-Man was different. This was not simply another part. This was a character with decades of history. A character recognized across the world. A character that audiences already had strong opinions about. And now, Tom Holland was going to be the person behind the mask. That meant every decision mattered. Every performance would be judged. Every movement would be analyzed. Every scene would be compared. The young actor who had once been auditioning simply for opportunities was now carrying expectations that were much larger than himself. And yet, when you look back at everything Tom had already experienced, there was a reason he was prepared for it. He had already learned how to work. He had already learned how to listen. And most importantly, he had already learned how to stay grounded. Before audiences knew Tom Holland as Spider-Man, they knew him as a young performer. He had been acting for years. By the time he appeared on the talk show, he explained that it would soon be 10 years since he began acting. That means his relationship with performance started when he was still very young. For most people, 10 years is a long period of adulthood. For Tom, those 10 years represented a huge portion of his childhood and teenage years. He had grown up inside the entertainment industry. That experience gave him something valuable: perspective. He knew that acting was not simply about standing in front of a camera and saying lines. It was about preparation. It was about repetition. It was about working with other people. It was about being able to perform even when you were nervous, and it was about accepting that you could not always control the outcome. That final lesson became especially important when Spider-Man entered his life. Because no matter how badly Tom wanted the role, he could not simply decide that he would get it. He had to audition. He had to wait. He had to trust the process. And eventually, he had to accept whatever decision was made. For approximately 5 months, that process continued. 5 months of auditions. 5 months of uncertainty. 5 months of trying to prove that he could become Peter Parker. Then came the final audition. And after that, the waiting became even harder. Imagine being told, "You will know tomorrow." You spend months preparing for a role. You finally complete the final audition. You give everything you have. And then someone tells you that the answer will come the next day. You expect a phone call. You expect a message. You expect some kind of official confirmation. But tomorrow arrives. Nothing. Another day passes. Still nothing. And then another. Tom eventually waited approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks after being told he would find out the next day. That kind of waiting can test anyone. Especially someone young. Especially when the opportunity is enormous. And especially when you know that somewhere, another actor could be waiting for the same answer. The mind starts asking questions. Did I do enough? Did they like me? Did I make a mistake? Did someone else get it? Should I move on? Should I keep hoping? Those are the kinds of thoughts that can appear during long periods of uncertainty. But Tom continued with his life. He continued working. And then one day, something happened that he could never have expected. Marvel announced the new Spider-Man online, and Tom found out with everyone else. The story almost sounds like something from a comedy. Marvel posted an announcement telling fans to visit its website to find out who the new Spider-Man was. Tom saw it, and immediately, he reacted. He ran downstairs. He was going ballistic. His excitement was so intense that even his dog Tessa was apparently terrified. But then came the doubt. His brother Harry was not immediately convinced. Harry thought Marvel might have been hacked. Why? Because if Tom really had been chosen, surely Marvel would have called him first. That would make sense. At least, that was what they assumed. But Tom called his agents, and the truth became clear. It was real. He was Spider-Man, and then Kevin Feige called him personally. Tom already knew what the call was about. The official confirmation came after the internet had already given him the answer. It was an unusual way to receive the biggest news of his career, but it became one of the most memorable stories from his early journey. There is something fascinating about that moment. For months, Tom had been living with uncertainty. Then suddenly, there was no uncertainty anymore. The secret was out. The world knew. And Tom knew. The role he had wanted was no longer a possibility. It was reality. But reality brings pressure. When a dream is still a dream, you can imagine everything going perfectly. You can imagine the applause. You can imagine the success. You can imagine the excitement. But once the dream becomes real, you have to deal with the difficult parts too. Now Tom had to actually perform. He had to step onto the set. He had to become Peter Parker. He had to convince audiences. He had to handle the physical demands, and he had to deal with the fact that millions of people would have an opinion about his performance. That is the difference between dreaming about a role and actually receiving it. The dream is exciting. The reality requires work. This is where Tom's relationship with his family becomes especially important. Throughout the conversation, he repeatedly described his family as a source of support. His parents had instilled core values in him. They had helped create a protective environment around him. And even as he became more independent, they remained close. That support mattered because fame can be isolating. When everyone around you wants something from you, it becomes difficult to know who is genuinely looking out for you. But family can provide a different kind of relationship. They knew Tom before the fame. They knew him before Spider-Man. They knew him when he was simply their son. That kind of connection can keep someone grounded, and Tom seemed to understand how valuable that was. He openly said he was thankful for the protection and support he received. He also recognized that not everyone has the same advantage. That humility was important, because it would have been easy for a young actor to look at success and believe he had achieved everything entirely on his own. Tom did not describe it that way. He acknowledged the people who helped him. Tom's relationship with his parents also showed another important transition. He was growing up. At some point, every young person needs more independence. Tom explained that after turning 18, he wanted his parents to give him a little more space. He wanted to be able to grow. He wanted to experience being a teenager and becoming an adult. But the interesting part was that his parents respected those boundaries. They did not disappear. They simply adjusted. That is an important distinction. Growing up does not mean you stop needing people. It means your relationships change. The person who once woke you up every morning might eventually become someone you call when you need advice. The parent who once made every decision might eventually become someone who helps you think through your own decisions. Tom was entering that stage. He was becoming more independent. But his family remained close. That balance would become especially valuable as his career became more intense. Another quality that stands out from the conversation is Tom's ability to laugh. He could laugh about his mistakes. He could laugh about embarrassing rehearsal footage. He could joke about his mother waking him up. He could joke about his apartment. And he could even laugh about the strange circumstances surrounding his Spider-Man announcement. That might seem like a small personality trait, but it can be extremely valuable in a high-pressure career. Actors are constantly being evaluated. Their performances are criticized. Their appearances are discussed. Their interviews are analyzed. Their mistakes can become viral moments. If you take every criticism personally, the pressure can become overwhelming. But if you can maintain a sense of humor, you can create some distance between yourself and the chaos. Tom's ability to laugh at himself suggested that he had that quality. He did not seem afraid of looking silly, and that willingness to be imperfect is often what allows performers to take risks. Tom's dancing ability became another example of his willingness to take risks. During the interview, his dancing was praised. The conversation turned toward his performance on Lip Sync Battle. He had performed a Rihanna routine, and the performance had required preparation. It had also required courage. Because when you are an actor known for one type of performance, stepping into something completely different can be risky. If it goes well, people love it. If it goes badly, people remember that too. Tom went for it. He rehearsed for 3 days. He had to work around the uncertainty of whether the music could be cleared, and he had to perform a physically demanding move. That move did not go well during rehearsal. There was even video evidence. Tom fell. The moment looked painful, but instead of hiding the footage, he allowed it to be shown. That decision revealed something about his attitude. He was not trying to appear perfect. He was showing the process. The failed attempt, the embarrassing moment, the work behind the final performance. And that is something audiences often connect with, because success looks much more impressive when you understand how many times someone failed before getting it right. The dancing was not just entertainment. It also revealed a skill set that would become useful for Spider-Man. The character requires movement. Spider-Man does not simply stand still and deliver dialogue. He jumps, he swings, he fights, he climbs, he falls, he moves quickly. The physicality is part of the character, and Tom already had experience with physical performance. He was a dancer. He was comfortable learning choreography. He was willing to rehearse difficult movements. He was willing to fail and try again. Those qualities could translate into action performance. The actor behind Spider-Man needs to sell the idea that the character is agile. That movement needs to feel natural. It needs to look effortless, even when the process behind it is extremely difficult. Tom's background gave him a useful foundation. But foundation was not enough. He still had to put in the work. There is a major emotional difference between playing a character you like and playing a character you grew up loving. Tom described himself as a huge Spider-Man fan. That meant the role carried emotional weight. He was not stepping into a random franchise. He was becoming a character that had already been part of his imagination. For a fan, that can be overwhelming. You know the history. You know what the character means to people. You understand why audiences care. And that knowledge can create pressure. You want to do justice to the character. You want fans to accept you. You want to make the people who loved Spider-Man before you proud. At the same time, you have to create your own version. You cannot simply copy someone else. You have to bring something personal. That is the challenge every actor faces when taking on an iconic role. Tom was about to face it on one of the biggest stages imaginable. While his professional life was changing, his personal life was changing too. Tom had bought his first apartment. This represented another kind of milestone. Spider-Man was a professional achievement. The apartment was personal. It represented independence. He had spent nearly 2 years searching for a place. Eventually, his mother found one, and she apparently moved quickly. She told Tom about it. He liked the idea, and before he could fully process everything, she had already put in an offer. That story was funny, but it also showed how involved his family still was in his life. Tom was becoming more independent, but his mother was still helping him navigate adulthood. And there was something almost ironic about the situation. He had considered moving to Los Angeles. He had considered leaving home, but instead, he ended up buying a place just a few minutes away from his mother. He was moving forward, but not too far away. For Tom, adulthood was arriving quickly. One moment, he was living with his parents. Then he was approaching 21. He was buying property. He was building a major career. He was becoming Spider-Man. And suddenly, he had to think about things that had previously been handled for him. Furniture, beds, dishes, setting up a home, managing his own space. These details might seem insignificant compared with becoming Spider-Man, but they represent something important. Growing up happens in ordinary moments. You realize that nobody is going to make the decision for you. You realize that you are responsible for your own space. You realize that independence is not just freedom, it is responsibility. Tom was experiencing that transition while his career was accelerating, and that combination could be overwhelming. There is another reason Tom's story is interesting. He was still very young, yet his professional responsibilities were enormous. Many adults spend decades building careers before reaching the level of attention Tom was beginning to experience. He was doing it at an age when many people were still figuring out what they wanted to do. That creates a strange contradiction. On one side, you are incredibly successful. On the other, you are still growing as a person. You can be talented and still need guidance. You can be famous and still need your mother to wake you up. You can be a superhero on screen and still be figuring out how to furnish your first apartment. Those contradictions make Tom's story human, because fame does not automatically make someone older emotionally. It simply puts them under a brighter spotlight. Tom had acted before. He had worked for years, but Spider-Man represented a different category of opportunity. It was global. It was recognizable. It was connected to one of the biggest superhero characters in popular culture, and it came with expectations. The audience was not simply watching a new actor. They were watching a new Spider-Man. That distinction mattered. If the movie succeeded, Tom's career could change permanently. If audiences rejected him, the criticism could be enormous. That is the risk of taking on an iconic character. But Tom had already demonstrated something important. He was willing to take risks. He was willing to start over. He was willing to audition repeatedly, and he was willing to work. Those qualities would become essential. When Tom talked about auditioning for Spider-Man, one detail stood out. He said he had to break down the walls created by people's preconceived ideas of who he was. That is a powerful statement. Because once an actor becomes known for a particular role or image, audiences can become attached to that image. They begin to think, this is who that person is. Changing that perception is difficult. It requires proof. Not words, not promises, performance. Tom knew that, so he approached the Spider-Man auditions as a chance to prove something. He had to show that he could become someone else. He had to show that he could carry a major movie. He had to show that he was more than the roles audiences already knew. And he had to do it under enormous pressure. That is what made the audition journey so important. It was not simply about getting a job. It was about changing the way people saw him. Tom's willingness to start from the beginning is one of the strongest lessons from his story. Success can create entitlement. Once someone has achieved a certain level of recognition, they may begin to believe they no longer need to prove themselves. Tom's approach was different. He understood that a new opportunity required new effort. Even though he had years of acting experience, Spider-Man required him to audition. He accepted that. He did not expect the role simply because he had already been successful. He started again. That attitude can be difficult. Starting again means admitting that you still have something to learn. It means accepting rejection. It means listening. It means improving. And sometimes it means putting your ego aside. For a young actor entering a massive franchise, that humility could be one of his greatest strengths. When Marvel finally revealed Tom as Spider-Man, fans immediately had opinions. Some were excited, some were curious, some were uncertain. That is inevitable when a beloved character is recast. But Tom could not control everyone's reaction. All he could control was the work. That is an important lesson. When you enter a situation where millions of people will judge you, you cannot satisfy every person. You can only focus on what you can control. Your preparation, your performance, your professionalism, your effort. Tom had already spent months doing that. Now it was time to continue. There is a tendency to separate actors from their characters. On screen, Tom Holland would become Spider-Man. Off-screen, he was still Tom, a young actor, a son, a brother, a friend, a person buying his first apartment, a person who could laugh at a failed dance move, a person whose mother still called him in the morning. That distinction matters, because audiences sometimes forget that the person behind a famous character is still human. The mask creates a larger-than-life image, but behind the mask is someone who has doubts, someone who gets nervous, someone who makes mistakes, someone who learns. Tom's journey before Spider-Man showed that humanity, and perhaps that was exactly what would make his version of Peter Parker connect with audiences. If we step back and look at the entire journey, a pattern appears. Tom's success was built through preparation. Acting gave him experience. His family gave him stability. Dance gave him physical confidence. Auditions taught him persistence. Waiting taught him patience. Failure taught him humility, and Spider-Man gave him the opportunity to bring all of those lessons together. None of those things alone created the final result. It was the combination. That is why the story is more powerful than simply saying Tom Holland got cast as Spider-Man. The real story is, Tom Holland spent years becoming the person who could handle that opportunity. That is a completely different story. Every dream has a cost. For Tom, that cost included years of work. It included auditions. It included uncertainty. It included growing up in public. It included pressure. It included physical training and performance. And it included the challenge of balancing fame with ordinary life. The dream was not free, but Tom seemed willing to pay the price. And when the opportunity finally arrived, he embraced it. That is what makes the Spider-Man story so compelling. The role was enormous, but the preparation was just as important. Even after becoming Spider-Man, Tom was still learning. He was still figuring out adulthood. He was still learning how to manage independence. He was still growing as an actor. He was still learning how to handle attention. That is something audiences should remember when looking at young stars. Fame does not stop personal growth. It simply makes that growth visible. Tom's journey was happening while cameras were watching. His mistakes could be recorded. His successes could become headlines. His personal decisions could become public. And yet, he continued moving forward. The announcement that Tom Holland would play Spider-Man closed one chapter. But it opened another. The auditions were finished. The waiting was over. The apartment was becoming a reality. His 21st birthday was approaching. His acting career was entering a new phase. And somewhere ahead was the moment when he would finally put on the Spider-Man suit. Everything had been leading there. The child actor, the dancer, the son, the young performer, the determined auditionee, the person who waited 6 weeks for an answer, the person who discovered the news online. All of them were part of the same story. And now they were leading toward one character, Spider-Man. Getting the role was an achievement, but it was not the final test. The real test was what Tom would do with it. Could he carry the character? Could he make audiences believe in him? Could he bring something fresh? Could he handle the physical demands? Could he balance humor and emotion? Could he become a Spider-Man that felt authentic? Those questions would only be answered once audiences saw him on screen. Until then, the role remained a promise. A promise that this young actor had something special. A promise that all those auditions had been worth it. A promise that the years of preparation were leading somewhere. But promises must eventually become performances. And Tom was about to face that moment. Tom Holland's story is not simply about becoming famous. It is about what happens when preparation finally meets opportunity. For years, he had worked without knowing exactly where the journey would lead. He acted, he danced, he auditioned, he waited, he learned, he made mistakes, he grew. And throughout it all, his family remained a constant source of support. Then came Spider-Man, a role that could change everything. A role that would introduce him to an entirely new audience. A role that would test everything he had learned. The young actor who once needed his mother to wake him up was now preparing to become one of the world's most famous superheroes. That contrast tells you just how quickly life can change. But perhaps the most important part is this. Tom did not become Spider-Man because the suit magically transformed him. The suit simply revealed everything he had already been building. The discipline, the confidence, the humor, the physical ability, the persistence, the family values, the willingness to start again, the willingness to fail, and the courage to keep going. The world was about to see the result. But behind the mask was still the same young man who had been working toward this moment for years. And that is where the next chapter begins. There are moments in a career when everything suddenly makes sense. The years of work, the difficult auditions, the failures, the waiting, the support from family, the sacrifices, the lessons. All of it eventually leads to one moment. For Tom Holland, that moment was becoming Spider-Man. But the most important part of the story was never simply the announcement. It was everything that happened before it. Because when Marvel revealed Tom Holland as the new Spider-Man, the world saw a young actor receiving an extraordinary opportunity. What the world did not immediately see was the journey that had prepared him for it. He had already spent years acting. He had already learned what it meant to perform under pressure. He had already discovered the importance of discipline. He had already learned to rely on his family. He had already learned how to fail and laugh about it. And he had already learned that opportunities are not guaranteed. You have to earn them. That lesson became the foundation of everything that followed. When people talk about becoming a movie star, they often focus on the glamorous side. The premieres. The cameras, the interviews, the applause, the fans, the money, the recognition. But Tom's story reveals another side, the side nobody sees, the side where an actor waits months for an answer, the side where auditions happen again and again, the side where you have to prove that you are more than people's assumptions about you, the side where you can spend years working without knowing exactly where your career will end up. Tom had experienced that side long before Spider-Man, and perhaps that was why the opportunity meant so much. He knew what it was like to work towards something without knowing whether it would happen. He knew what uncertainty felt like. He knew what it meant to keep going. So when Spider-Man finally arrived, it was not simply luck. It was the result of years of preparation meeting one enormous opportunity. By the time Tom was discussing his career, he was approaching 10 years in acting. 10 years. That number is easy to say, but imagine what 10 years means when you begin as a child. Your entire life changes during that period. Your personality changes. Your confidence changes. Your interests change. Your responsibilities change. You become a different person. Tom had grown up while working as an actor. That meant he had learned many lessons earlier than most people. He had learned how to work with professionals. He had learned how to memorize lines. He had learned how to perform. He had learned how to deal with pressure, and he had learned how to present himself in front of people. Those lessons were valuable, but they also came with a cost. Growing up in entertainment means that some of your childhood happens in front of cameras. People see you develop. They see you change, and sometimes they form opinions about you based on who you were years earlier. Tom understood that. That was why he talked about breaking down preconceived ideas. He needed people to see who he was becoming, not simply who he had been. This is one of the most important parts of his story. When an actor becomes known for a certain type of role, people can put them inside a box. They think they know what that actor can do. They think they know what kind of character they can play. And sometimes those expectations become difficult to escape. Tom faced that challenge when he pursued Spider-Man. He knew people had preconceived ideas about him, so he had to prove that he could step outside those expectations. That meant auditioning. It meant meeting people. It meant showing up. It meant putting in the work. And most importantly, it meant being willing to start again. That is not always easy. Imagine already having years of experience and still being told, indirectly, prove yourself. But Tom accepted the challenge. He did not expect his previous work to guarantee the role. He treated the opportunity as something he had to earn. That attitude would become one of the defining parts of his journey. The Spider-Man audition process lasted approximately 5 months. 5 months is a long time to live with uncertainty. During that period, Tom had to keep performing. He had to continue with his career. He had to continue meeting expectations. But somewhere in the back of his mind was the possibility that everything could change. Then came the final audition. At that point, he was told he would find out the next day. That sounds like relief. After months of waiting, the answer was finally coming. But it did not. Tomorrow came, and the answer did not. Then another day. Still nothing. Eventually, 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks. The kind of waiting that can make a person question everything. But Tom continued. He did not stop living his life. He continued working. He continued moving forward. And then Marvel announced the new Spider-Man. Tom did not receive the news in the traditional way. He discovered it online. Marvel posted the announcement. Tom saw it, and immediately, he knew. He ran downstairs. He was incredibly excited. His dog Tessa apparently had no idea what was happening. His brother Harry was skeptical. Maybe Marvel had been hacked. Maybe this wasn't real. Maybe the studio would call Tom if he had actually been chosen. But then the agents confirmed it, and eventually, Kevin Feige called. The official confirmation had arrived. Tom Holland was Spider-Man. That sentence represented years of work, years of uncertainty, years of acting, years of preparation. And suddenly, it was real. The dream had crossed the line between imagination and reality. There is something almost perfect about Tom discovering the news through social media. The character of Spider-Man belongs to the public. Fans feel connected to him. They discuss him. They debate him. They celebrate him. And Tom discovered that he was going to become Spider-Man almost at the same time the world discovered it. His private dream became a public event. There was no long private celebration before the announcement. The internet was already talking. The secret was already out. And Tom was suddenly part of one of the biggest conversations in entertainment. For a young actor, that must have been overwhelming. But it was also the beginning of something extraordinary. Being Spider-Man was not simply a career opportunity. It was a responsibility. The character had been loved for generations. People had memories connected to Spider-Man. Some had grown up reading the comics. Others had watched previous movies. Many fans had their own idea of what Peter Parker should be. Now Tom had to step into that history. He could not control every opinion. He could not make everyone happy. But he could control the effort he put into the role. And effort was something he already understood. He had spent years practicing. He had spent months auditioning. He had worked through difficult performances. He had learned to handle failure. He had learned to trust the process. Those experiences prepared him for the pressure.
Tom Holland and Zendaya have always been one of those celebrity couples who manage to keep the world guessing. Millions of fans know their names. Millions have watched them together on screen. Millions have followed their journey from Spider-Man co-stars to one of Hollywood's most beloved couples. But when it comes to their private life, Tom and Zendaya have always been extremely careful. And now, a new report is creating fresh excitement. According to the transcript behind the story, Tom Holland and Zendaya have reportedly celebrated their marriage again during a private event at a luxury hotel in the English countryside. The report claims that this gathering happened quietly, away from the cameras and the usual Hollywood spotlight. And naturally, fans have one huge question. The story is especially interesting because it comes after reports that Tom and Zendaya may have already tied the knot earlier in the year during an extremely private ceremony. However, it is important to separate reports from confirmed facts. The details of any private wedding or celebration should not be treated as officially confirmed unless Tom, Zendaya, or a reliable source directly verifies them. Still, The possibility alone has sent fans into another wave of excitement.
Why?
Because Tom Holland and Zendaya have never been an ordinary Hollywood couple. Their story began with Spider-Man. When Tom was cast as Peter Parker and Zendaya joined the franchise as MJ, audiences immediately noticed their chemistry. On screen, Peter and MJ were awkward, funny, emotional, and surprisingly relatable. Their relationship developed gradually. Peter clearly cared about MJ, while MJ slowly began allowing Peter into her world. The chemistry between the characters became one of the most memorable parts of the new Spider-Man films. But while fans were watching Peter Parker fall in love with MJ on screen, something else was happening behind the scenes. Tom and Zendaya became close friends. They spent huge amounts of time together while filming. They traveled together for promotions. They appeared together at premieres. They joked with each other during interviews. And naturally, fans started asking the question they always ask when two young actors have incredible chemistry. For a long time, neither of them gave the public a clear answer. They seemed comfortable joking about the rumors, but they also wanted to maintain their privacy. Then came the moments that changed everything. Photographs of Tom and Zendaya together began circulating, and suddenly the speculation became much more intense. Fans around the world celebrated. The Spider-Man romance had apparently become a real-life romance. But even after their relationship became widely known, the couple did not suddenly start sharing every detail. Quite the opposite. They continued to keep much of their relationship private. That decision is important because Tom and Zendaya are both global stars. They cannot easily go anywhere without being recognized. A dinner can become a news story. A vacation can become a headline. A simple photograph can trigger thousands of theories online. And a wedding? A wedding involving Tom Holland and Zendaya would become one of the biggest celebrity stories imaginable. That is probably why a private ceremony would make sense. Imagine what would happen if they announced a massive public wedding. The internet would explode. Fans would want photographs. Fashion magazines would want Zendaya's wedding look. Entertainment outlets would investigate the guest list. Photographers would search for the venue. Every celebrity attending could become another headline. For a couple that values privacy, that level of attention could be overwhelming. So if they really did choose to celebrate privately, it would be completely consistent with how they have handled their relationship. The reported English countryside setting makes the story even more interesting. Instead of a massive Hollywood event, imagine a quiet luxury hotel surrounded by the English countryside. Away from Los Angeles. Away from huge crowds. Away from constant cameras. It would be a completely different atmosphere from the world Tom and Zendaya normally live in. Tom, of course, is British, so England has always represented a connection to home. A private celebration there would fit the image of a couple trying to create a peaceful environment for an important personal moment. But again, the exact location and details remain part of the report unless independently confirmed. And that distinction matters. Celebrity stories can spread incredibly quickly. A report appears. Another outlet repeats it. Fans post about it. Social media accounts turn it into a headline. Soon, thousands of people are discussing the story as if every detail has been confirmed. But sometimes the original information is much more limited. That is why this story should be viewed carefully. What we know is that reports are circulating about Tom and Zendaya and a possible private marriage celebration. What we do not know for certain is exactly what happened behind those private doors. And perhaps that mystery is part of the reason people are so fascinated. Tom and Zendaya have always given fans just enough to keep the story alive. They show affection without turning their relationship into a public performance. They support each other's careers. They appear together when appropriate. But they also keep a significant part of their lives away from the spotlight. That balance is rare in Hollywood. Many celebrity couples share almost everything. Tom and Zendaya have taken a different approach. They seem to understand that a relationship does not need to be constantly displayed to be real. And perhaps that is why their relationship has remained so intense. The public has seen their journey, from young Spider-Man co-stars, to close friends, to rumored romance, to a confirmed relationship, and now, possibly, to marriage. For longtime fans, that feels like a huge milestone. But the story does not end there, because both Tom and Zendaya are entering major new stages in their careers. They are no longer simply young actors from a superhero franchise. They have become major Hollywood stars in their own right, and their names continue appearing alongside some of the biggest projects in the entertainment industry. That means their visibility is only increasing. More movies, more premieres, more interviews, more red carpets, more cameras, and, inevitably, more questions about their relationship. So even if they want privacy, maintaining that privacy may become increasingly difficult. Every appearance could become a new clue. Every ring could become a headline. Every interview could be analyzed. Every photograph could create another theory. And yet, Tom and Zendaya have already shown that they are willing to live with that attention. They do not have to answer every rumor. They do not have to explain every photograph. And they do not have to share every private moment. If they really have celebrated their marriage privately, perhaps that is exactly how they wanted it. Quietly, personally, surrounded by the people they trust. Not for Hollywood, not for social media, not for the cameras, but for themselves. And that may be the most important part of this entire story. Because behind all the headlines, Tom Holland and Zendaya are still two people trying to build a life together while living under an extraordinary level of public attention. The world may want to know what happened,